What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of JaAR. JaAR, for those of you that may be new, stands for Joe
and Amy
Review. It's our weekly show where we review the magic stories as they're posted on Wizard's website. And this week we are back with more Vivien Reid stories, specifically Unbowed Part 2, once again by Cassandra Caw. So, this week, my quick review at the top is actually, I think, going to be a little bit different from Amy's. So why don't you start?
Okay. I mean, my quick review is I did not find this to be as interesting a story as last week or last time.
It was last week. I mean,
last week.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, it was okay. It was okay.
And this hasn't happened in quite some time, but I would say that I enjoyed this more than last week's. Not a ton more necessarily, and we'll go into a little bit more depth, a little bit more in depth as to why in the full review itself, but I think it was good. I mean, look, this is a 3-part secondary story to the main story of M19. So as far as I'm concerned, and maybe you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but as far as I'm concerned, if this was something that you were going to be interested in reading, you kind of knew this ahead of time. And maybe if you wanted to come here and make sure that, like last week or on Monday when we put out our video, that we weren't like, wow, this was terrible. And then you'd be like, okay, good, I'm not going to waste my time. But because Mondays was good and we enjoyed it, and now Amy didn't enjoy it as much as last week, but I did, and I think it was pretty good. Maybe that will, say enough to you if you were on the fence that it's worth some time. This one was also not an incredibly long story, I didn't feel.
And not just that it's worth some time, but it's worth reading the story yourself.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
It's not worth it to just watch our videos and assume that what we're saying makes sense and just is right because we're saying it. It makes a lot more sense to read it and form your own opinions, then come here, see what we had to say about it, and then if you agree or disagree, you can leave that in the comments. It's, as we always say, there's a back and forth.
Right.
And we like to hear what you have to say about it.
Yes, exactly. And so that's our quick review. The quick review this week is not super helpful. Usually it is, because Amy didn't enjoy it as much as last week.
Yeah, we usually are in more of an agreement,
yeah,
I think.
Yeah, so this one was a little bit different, and so maybe we just need to get into the full review itself. But I will say, if you have not had a chance to read the story yet, and this somehow convinced you to want to, or be so that you then
deterred you.
Right, but like Amy said, so that then you can add your voice to the discussion, right, and say whether you lean more towards what Amy was saying or more towards what I was saying, which I think, I'm not a statistics guy, but as far as I can recall, statistically, when we've asked that question, I think more often than not, people have been like, no, I agree with Amy, and that happens. I get it. But still, if you want to give your opinion, I would appreciate it. So, for those of you that are interested in doing so, if you're not aware of where to find the stories, we'll have a link to the story down in the description box below. So please feel free to go check that out, read it for yourself, form your own opinion, and then, if you want, because it would be cool, come on back here.
Rejoin us.
Yeah, rejoin us again. Come on back, listen to our review. Speaking of which, without further ado, on to the full review itself, because that took a while.
I feel like we were already there.
Yeah, we called it a quick review at the beginning. It's not that. But yeah, on to the full review itself. I think, and this is my estimation as to why we differ in the ways that we did, was because if you watched last week's video, hopefully you did, and hopefully you enjoyed it. It'll be linked at the end for you, as it always is.
They probably didn't.
I mean, who knows? And I said last week, we literally did it 3 days ago at the time that, at the time that we're releasing this. So, but yeah, if you watched Monday's video, we both liked that story, but Amy was the one who led the discussion on the parallels that the story drew to French history, specifically around the events surrounding the start of, or the spurring on of, the French Revolution. I am not a history guy. I've said that many times on this show. I'm aware of some things, but Amy is much more interested in that than I am. And much more, therefore, much more knowledgeable on it than I am. And so, for something that draws such parallels, it would seemingly, and again, purely my opinion, purely my guess as to why there is a difference here, that would probably make it a more interesting story to someone who can see all of those parallels. Now, that's not to say that I didn't appreciate when you drew my attention to those parallels. I thought it was really cool, and go watch last week's video. I said I enjoyed it, right? But I still think I enjoyed this week's more personally, and my reasoning for that is I loved the interactions between the Baron and Vivian, because I'm a superhero guy, right? That's, Marvel Comics specifically, because that's just me, but like, and of course the movies are a thing, but I've been a comic book fan for many, many years, even before the movies, and now very much, has not changed, if has only grown. But that moment was really cool to me. It was classic villain-hero dynamic of the villain captured the hero. It doesn't look good for the hero. And the villain is able to give their speech, kind of be super cocky to the hero and torture them, and all hope seems lost, etc. And then there's that one moment. There's that one moment where there's a click, there's a switch, and now the hero has the upper hand over the villain, and now we go into the climax of the story, which will seemingly be, Friday's end story. And I really appreciated that. But, just so that I'm not the only one talking, I appreciated the point that you made as well as to why you didn't like the story for the reasons that I enjoyed it. And so I wanted you to be able to talk about that.
Okay. I don't know why it needed to be such a platform. But yeah, I mean, all of those things that you just described as reasons for liking the story were all kind of the reasons why I didn't. It's too expected. It's too... I've heard this story before. Too many times.
And that's a fair point. It's a fair point. I have not heard it as much in the Magic story, in the Magic stories.
That is true.
And so for that reason, I think is why I enjoyed it. Now, to be fair, we have Nicol Bolas as a thing.
Right.
So I can't say that it's just never happened, because Bolas has had many different examples of this kind of a situation, like at the end of Amonkhet, right, is the one that I'm going to think of the most, the Hour of Devastation, where he is talking to each individual planeswalker and kind of bragging, like, I'm better than all of you, and this is how I'm showing it. Each one of you individually, I'm going to make you leave, and you're going to lose.
Right.
The same can be said for Razaketh. The same can be said for Belzenlach when they're talking to Liliana. They're both super cocky and villainous, and maybe I'm just a sucker for it. I loved each and every one of those moments. I loved the Nicol Bolas taunting. I loved the Razaketh taunting. I loved the Belzenlach taunting, and now I love the Baron taunting. And so I think it's a fair point that Amy brought up, which is why I gave it, I guess, such a platform, is because I think it's a fair point to bring up that it's not new. Whereas, besides, like, the movie Les Miserables with, Hugh Jackman and Anne Hathaway, etc., many, many other people, when else have you seen an allegory to the French Revolution anytime recently? So that's a fair point, I think, to be brought up. I just liked it. I don't know what else to...
I guess I would say to that maybe if it was a standalone story and I didn't have last week's story preceding it, I would have enjoyed it more. Because as you bring up those other examples, I sit here saying, yes, I liked that story a lot. Yes, I liked that story a lot. So perhaps if I didn't have the interesting intricacies, that was weirdly hard for me to say, of last week's story before this one, it wouldn't have made this one quite so boring to me.
Okay. I will also say, if and while we're comparing it to last week, a discussion that was a pretty big part of last week's / Monday's story, for us, was me discussing, or us discussing, the vocabulary that was used. And I feel like it was somewhat present here, but drastically less than last time. Drastically less. In fact, I would venture, I have no stats, once again, because that would be a lot of stats. And the other thing is, it's subjective, right? If you've heard the word before, it's not necessarily difficult vocabulary for you. But if you haven't, then it is. And so maybe some of the words this week I had just heard before, I've been lucky enough to hear before. The question that you would ask me on palatial, right? Maybe it's a word you'd heard before, but because I'm reading it out loud, but
I hadn't heard that before.
But I
That's
knew.
why I said, what's palatial?
And I knew it is of a palace, or similar to
Which
a palace.
makes perfect sense, but I had never heard it said that way before.
And so for me, palatial was not one of those words, for example, that I came across and went, what does this word mean? Can I figure it out through context clues? Do I have to actually look it up?
Well, but I think at the same time, too, especially with a word like that, seeing the word probably helps you know what it is.
Oh, agreed.
Right?
And that's...
So, like, the fact that I'm hearing it come out of your mouth but not seeing it on the page, I think adds to my lack of understanding of what that word means.
Yeah, of course, absolutely.
Because if I see the word palace, I'll...
Well, and it's
kind of in the word,
right.
Then I'll know what it means based on that.
It's palatial with a T, not with a C, but it's still very similar.
Okay.
Regardless, so that's the kind of thing, like for an example of a word that might have been difficult for some, but not for others, and so it's super subjective. But I would still venture to say, at least for me, at the caliber of reading that I am, right? And there's no way to gauge that, but the caliber of reader that I am looking at this story, I would say the kind of upper level vocabulary, upper level meaning words that I was not inherently familiar with and would have had to look up to fully understand and or needed context clues to fully understand, was about a quarter of what it was last time.
I thought there was like one or two.
This time.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, okay. So maybe less than a quarter? No, that's fair. I would say maybe less than a quarter.
It felt like less than a quarter.
I think for the first, since I'm using that fraction, for the first quarter of the story, this week, there seemed to be none.
Right.
And then it kind of ramped up a little bit, I think, solely in... You want to know why? I think it's because last week was a lot more descriptive words to try to build the world that we were in. And obviously you don't need to build Ixalan as a world, but to build the area of Ixalan that we were in, mainly Luno, there was a lot of descriptive language. And so because of it, if they were then trying to, again, allude to the French Revolution or French...
Pre-French Revolution.
Thank you, yes, I keep messing that up. But yes, that they were trying to allude to that era in terms of architecture and style and etc. There are a lot of descriptions that need to be used, and as I mentioned, some seemingly just French-aligned words as well. And so if that's the case, then this week, where it's purely, heavily dialogue-based as opposed to description-based, the Baron and Vivian don't necessarily talk that fancifully. And so...
Yeah, but I'm not really sure why the Baron doesn't.
I don't know.
Because he's a Baron. Like, if he was just a guy... I mean, there was a point in this story where they specifically referenced that kind of messenger guy that came to escort Vivian to the Baron had a particularly provincial way of talking.
Yes, which was great. I loved that.
And saying that is perfect. It's very descriptive when you think about the previous story as your comparison there.
Oh yeah, that's a good point.
But then to bring her to the Baron, who then seemingly didn't talk any differently. I don't know.
I don't know, because I'm not exactly sure like what the Baron's role is. I mean, he seems to be somewhat of a badass. I mean, kind of once Vivian broke that down, he wasn't as much, but he seemed to be like a little bit more rough and tumble than someone like the King might be, and much more so seemingly than people like Frederick and the woman with the fan from the last story.
Well, I mean, he's hired help, right? So, kind of, maybe.
Yeah, but I mean, seemingly hired for his skills, right?
Right.
You know, he discussed research and stuff this week, so...
So maybe you hire someone who's right for the job.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so you don't hire some... I'll use a word from the last story. Dandy aristocrat
Yep.
to, you know, beat people up.
Yeah, because
you hire somebody who is, you know, a little bit street.
right. You don't want somebody who is afraid to break a nail or mess up their wig or, you know, get blood on their clothes or whatever. You need a guy who's more willing to get his hands dirty, not necessarily, you know, literally or figuratively. So so I'm not exactly sure. Maybe the Baron's not as prim and proper. It's kind of harder to tell.
Like, they talked about the description of that a little bit as she entered the room. But, I don't know. The fact that he's called a baron, though, I don't know.
Well, and
I think it's just that word that kind of...
Right. Well, and I wrote it down...
puts me off a bit.
Right, and I wrote it down in my notes. Don't forget, when Vivian went with the nuns to go to her holding area, like the seclusion space that she was put in, there were those guards outside. Those guards that were dressed in nice clothing, but that Vivian was instantly able to realize were obviously thugs that were dressed up nice. Yeah. They were dressed up nice, but they weren't.
Right.
They weren't what they looked to be. They were just dressed that way.
Right. Well, because they work in a palace. You know, you're going to put them in nice clothes, but they're there to kick ass.
Seemingly. I mean, we didn't get to see it, but I mean, the other thing, again, Vivian this week had kind of both sides of herself. She had towards the beginning, she comes to, and the Baron says that he took the bow, and so she lunges or lurches or whatever, and, you know, without realizing that she's shackled or held or both, and so she doesn't... Right, so she doesn't really get very far, but then at the end, or near the end, when she's in the kind of the research viewing room with the King and the Baron and the Monstrosaur, she looks around the room and she goes, there's too many of them, there's too many bows, there's too many swords. So you see the tactical side, but you also see the flustered, like, you know, able to be manipulated side. And that's why I appreciated the 180 in this story, because in the beginning she's reckless, whereas that's how the last story ended, right? In the beginning of the last story, she was calm and controlled and did that exact same thing. There's too many of them, I can't do this now. But then she sees the Monstrosaur, she sees it being beaten down, and she goes, that's it, I'm done. I'm not waiting anymore. I'm gonna step in right now, and she gets captured for it. So at the beginning of this one, he said he took the Ark Bow. She again tries to lunge, isn't paying attention, but then by the end, she's calm and collected again. And that's where the role reverses again. So you see now the Baron kind of on the back foot. The Baron not responding to her verbal jabs that she's throwing out at him, that she had not been responding to when the Baron was on the throwing end, if you will, at the beginning of the story. So we have an ABBA version of stories. ABBA, right? It's ABBA. That's what it is.
I
know you do. That's kind of why I said it. Sorry. So we have the ABBA stories. These between Monday and today, or last week and this week. But that's what it seemed like in terms of Vivian as a character, but also her interactions with a character like the Baron. It was very 1, 2, 2, 1, if you will. So we're not using ABBA references that Amy hates. But which I appreciate. I appreciated seeing the flow. I appreciated the flow in general. I liked it a lot. I thought it worked out really well. Okay. And being able to catch on to kind of still holding on to a little bit of the societal aspects of it in terms of the prim and proper versus the street, as you correctly put it, right? I can't think of a better word, so I like it.
Right.
The street people versus the dandy folk. That's how we're referring to them from now on. And and we'll see what happens next week, because I'm also kind of interested. Vivian mentioned that the Ark Bow was next to the quiver that was empty. Mm-hmm. So does that mean she has no more beasts with her? Does she have, the ability? Because in the art for her, a lot of the arrows were, at least they looked magical only, right? They looked kind of green and electric. Now, I don't know if that is just the physical arrow covered in that electricity, or if she can just summon that herself, because as she correctly pointed out, she's the one performing the ritual, she's the one who's able to wield it, and there's kind of that cute moment of her telling the Baron, again, as she's gaining the upper hand, that she's the only one who can do it because the Ark Bow was made for her, and then kind of internally she's like, it wasn't technically made for just me, but seeing as how I'm the only one left, it might as well have been.
Right.
And that's pretty typical of, situations like that. If you know something to be true, but you present it in a different way and the other people don't know any better, you might
as well be right.
Yep. You get to shape their understanding of it. Yeah, you do. You get to shape their understanding of it. So that was kind of cool. We got a couple more glimpses into Nicol Bolas and what he did, and what she saw as the world ended. We got to hear her describe, because again, as she's gaining the upper hand, she describes what the Ark Bow does and how it works, because she no longer sees the Baron as a threat, seemingly. Because in the beginning, she doesn't tell him any information, right? He wants to know these things, and she doesn't tell him. She's just completely silent. And then at the end, when he's like, okay, for the 75th time, tell me what the Ark Bow does, or how do we use it, or what does it do?
Yeah, but I feel like if she just, was gonna ultimately tell him that information, and ultimately say, hey, I'm the only one who can use this, she probably could have done that earlier on and not had to endure all the torture.
True. I'm not sure how much of that. I'm not sure how much of that was her being caught off guard, and how much of that was her truly not maybe she was bluffing. Maybe she was bluffing in it, because he did say that they were able to make the bear come out.
Yeah.
It killed a bunch of more of his men before it disappeared, and he said, I think whether he said that the serpent came out and then disappeared almost instantly or whatever. So it works without her. It's just not able to be controlled.
Well, it doesn't work correctly.
Well, it wasn't able to be controlled yet. They might have needed a little bit more practice with it. It's just that you don't have a lot of time to analyze and practice when you've just summoned a bear that's trying to kill you.
Well, maybe the animals came out as if to say, hey, you shouldn't be using this.
Maybe, to punish them for it.
Right.
It's definitely a possibility.
I'm going to attack you now because you're attempting to use this archbow when you shouldn't be.
Yeah, it's possible. So I'm not exactly sure. I'm because of last week and this week, I'm looking forward to the finale. Looking forward to next week. I think it'll be cool. Also, we got some hints on Twitter today from Blake, kind of thankfully going against our communication discussion from a few weeks ago between Blake and the Wizards_Magic Twitter accounts. They were answering questions about the story. I will give credit where credit is due. I'm not going to not credit them for answering questions seemingly immediately, right? I don't have the breakdown of whether it was an hour later, 2 hours later, whatever. But frankly, because it wasn't multiple days later, and because there was the holiday on Monday, at least here in the States, those answers seem to be pretty forthcoming. The two accounts, like I said, Blake and the regular Wizards account, were very forthcoming with their information as much as they could be, right? There was one where they were like, that's kind of spoilery and we can't do it, but the question, the person who asked the question said that. They were like, this could be spoilers.
Right.
And so Wizards said, you're right, it is spoilers, we can't, but, here's what we can tell you, and it looks like Friday, which is when this finale will be coming out, is also the day that they'll be announcing information for the Guilds of Ravnica stories and when we can expect those. So, to begin and etc., which is going to be super helpful for, content creators such as ourselves, but also for fans so that they can know what to expect and when.
Yeah.
And so
this
that
is
was
an
really cool.
instance when we can for once say, thanks for the advance notice.
Oh, yeah. Well, and again, like I said, give credit where credit is due. Right, we commented on the issues that we had with the lack of communication or the drastic delay in communication and lack of any heads up whatsoever, even when being asked fair, pointed questions on the issue. And now, while being asked fair and pointed questions on the issue, they answered them expeditiously and as specifically as they could, which, like I said, credit where it's due. It was great. I appreciated it, and I'm not above, saying that something that we were upset about seems to have been corrected. I
Certainly
appreciate, because otherwise what's the point in asking?
Right.
Or talking about it? We're not just coming here to be like, they suck and this is why and this is what they did and they're the worst,
Right.
and then never saying when they do something right.
Right, and then coming back the following week and be like, see, they were assholes, they didn't listen to us, blah, blah, blah,
Right. And that's...
No, we're going to say they listened to us when they listened to us.
Right.
Not to say that they were listening to us, but you know what I mean.
Well, but it was a heavy topic in the community. Yeah, I would say specifically the Vorthos community, but I'm sure that there are other communities that feel like there has not been a lot of information sharing, and so this was them being forthcoming, and I really, really appreciated it. I also want to clarify, just to make sure that there's no misunderstanding, we used the word, but it was as a contrary statement. We have in no way, to my knowledge, ever called anyone at Wizards an asshole. And meant it. To my knowledge.
I don't know what you're referring to.
We referenced it before. And we said, they're assholes and blah, blah, we would come here and say that. I don't think we've ever said that, and I think that that's just being exaggerative.
We were exaggerating.
Right, and I don't want that to imply anything. That has never been a comment. We have only ever commented on, at least in my opinion, we've only ever commented on when we felt like something was egregious or inappropriate. And we've mentioned it, and like I said, when we see that being corrected, we'll comment on it. And if you have any feelings or opinions on any of that stuff, that's what the comments are for. Tell us, talk to us about it. Were we being unfair? Were we too harsh? Were we not harsh enough? Let us know. As with
we
anything.
also understand that, we have biases as people do.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
And so maybe we're just being too harsh. If that's what you think, tell us.
And more specifically, to bring it back, for this week's story, like I said at the top, did you feel like Amy felt? Did you feel like I felt? Did you hate it outright? Did you love it outright? Was this your favorite or your least favorite or somewhere in between? I think it'll be kind of cool at the end of Friday's story to kind of rank the three of them for ourselves and see where it landed, and then have you guys give your opinions as well on that. That would be kind of cool, especially because it's three. It's somewhat of a contained universe with just three, right? Like doing it with all 8 of the M19 or all 12 of the Dominaria would be a little tough, but
it's almost too difficult to compare the two that we just read. I mean, they're so drastically different.
Agreed.
In basically every way. I
mean, right. One was setting up the tone. The other one was conflict. Right. There wasn't a lot of conflict in the last one. I guess there was towards the end.
I mean, the way it was written.
Mhm.
I mean, they're so completely different. It almost seemed like it was two different authors in the contrast of writing style.
Mhm. Which is a great thing. It shows Cassandra's range.
Right.
Cassandra? I assume it's Cassandra. I apologize if that's incorrect. But,
Well, but my point is when we read the third story, you know, if it's drastically different from the other two, I mean, we can sit here and talk about the similarities and the differences, but I don't know that we'll necessarily be able to say this one was the best, this one was the worst, this one was the middle, and here's why. You know,
That's fair.
I think it would be kind of more of a weird, you know, concept-driven conversation
Mhm.
about the three of them more than it would be a ranking system.
fair point. And you guys will get to see what we decide to do with that third story Saturday. We're not going to wait till Monday. We thought about it. We decided against it. We will try to get it out. I can't promise a time for Saturday because I'm not sure whether we'll film Friday night or Saturday during the day. But we're going to get this out to you guys on Saturday because I think it's a lot better to have the videos out the day after the stories so that you guys aren't like, oh yeah, that thing I read, 5 days ago or whatever.
Right.
So
that's no longer relevant.
right. So, and especially like I said, with Guilds of Ravnica previews and stuff that are out already, that are coming out more so, like we want to be able to.
We want to give this its time, but we don't want to eat into time that anything else also deserves, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, because Ravnica, kind of a big deal. Am I hitting you?
Hands in my face.
Sorry. I just didn't want to look at you while I was talking about Ravnica.
No.
I don't know why.
I'm hideous.
That's totally what it is. You figured it out. She figured it out, guys. So,
I clearly have always thought that you've thought that about me. Because, we're not engaged or anything.
Not even a little bit.
No.
So, thank you guys so much for watching this, another episode of JaAR, here on Geek for All. Hopefully you will join us in the comments section below and back again on Saturday to show off your...
#Vorthos Pride.
It was a longer held out
Pride.
Wow. Yeah, so join us back on Saturday for more of that.
Or
like I said, or hopefully not that. No,
or avoid it.
Whatever, we'll see. But yes, please come back on Saturday. You will see another one of these, like I said, and we will get into the finale of
Read
this
the
thing.
story first, please.
Yeah. Otherwise, come here, read. Click the link in the description and go read it, and then come back. Either way, whichever you prefer. But like I said, this has been another episode of JaAR here on Geek for All. I have been Joe,
And I'm Amy.
and as we always say, in whichever video of ours you watch next, we will see you all next time. Thanks, everybody.